Friends, fellow travelers of the digital highway, lend me your ears. Tonight, we embark on a journey not just across miles of asphalt and endless horizons, but into the very heart of what it means to face the unknown. We speak of a world often romanticized, a life of freedom and solitude, where the rumble of an engine is a symphony and the stars are your only companions. We speak, of course, of the American truck driver. These are the unsung heroes of our economy, the tireless navigators of our vast continent, moving the lifeblood of a nation from coast to shining coast. They are the guardians of our goods, the silent sentinels of our supply chains, and often, the unwitting witnesses to the strange, the unexplained, and the truly terrifying. There's a certain mystique to the open road, isn't there? A siren song that calls to the adventurous, the independent, the restless spirit. It promises freedom, a break from the mundane, a chance to see the world 1 mile at a time. But beneath that veneer of liberation, there lies a profound solitude. Hours stretch into days, days into weeks, with nothing but the hum of the tires and the occasional flicker of a distant town. It's in this profound solitude, in the quiet hours of the night, when the world outside is asleep, that the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary can become perilously thin. It's when the mind, left to its own devices, can begin to conjure shadows from the corners of its own making, or perhaps, when true shadows begin to stir. Tonight, we delve into a tale that will challenge your perceptions of reality. A story whispered in hushed tones at lonely truck stops, a legend born from the very asphalt that connects our nation. It's a story of a man, a truck, and a cargo that defied all logic, a cargo that cried. Prepare yourselves, for the journey ahead is fraught with psychological terror, an unraveling of sanity, and a chilling reminder that some secrets are best left buried, especially when they're sealed within a steel container. Our protagonist in this chilling narrative is a man named Jack. Now, Jack wasn't your typical wide-eyed rookie, fresh off the lot with dreams of glory. No, Jack was a road warrior, a grizzled veteran of countless cross-country hauls. His face, etched with the lines of 1,000 sunrises and sunsets, told a story of dedication, of resilience, and perhaps of a quiet weariness that only those who live life on the road truly understand. He'd seen it all, or so he thought. From blizzards in the Rockies to scorching deserts in Arizona, Jack had navigated every challenge the highway could throw at him. His rig, a gleaming testament to his profession, was more than just a vehicle. It was his home, his office, his sanctuary. He knew its every creak, its every groan, its every whisper. He trusted it implicitly, and it, in turn, had always carried him safely through the darkest of nights and the most treacherous of storms. But even the most seasoned veterans faced their trials. Jack, despite his years of experience, found himself in a familiar bind, the relentless squeeze of the economy. Freight rates were down, fuel prices were up, and the competition was fiercer than a pack of wolves on a winter night. He was barely breaking even, the bills piling up like snowdrifts in a forgotten mountain pass. The dream of the open road was slowly being suffocated by the harsh realities of the balance sheet. He needed a break, a big score, something to pull him out of the financial quicksand that threatened to swallow him whole. He was desperate, and desperation, as we all know, can lead even the most cautious among us down paths we would otherwise avoid. It was late, the kind of late where the only sounds are the distant hum of the highway and the rhythmic ticking of a forgotten clock. Jack was nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring at the flickering screen of his laptop, the glow illuminating the worry lines on his forehead. Another rejection, another lowball offer. The frustration was a bitter taste in his mouth, sharper than the stale coffee. He was on the verge of giving up, of throwing in the towel and finding a different line of work, something stable, something predictable. But the road, once it gets into your blood, is a hard habit to break. Calls to you even when it's kicking you down. Then an email, an unsolicited offer, appearing like a mirage in the desert of his despair. The subject line was cryptic, the sender unknown, but the numbers were staggering. A payout that would not only clear his debts but give him a comfortable cushion for months, perhaps even a year. It was almost too good to be true, and as the old adage goes, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. But desperation, as we've established, is a powerful motivator. It dulls the senses, clouds judgment, and whispers promises of salvation. The offer was simple, yet unsettling. Transport a single, unmarked container from a remote, undisclosed location in rural Nevada to a private facility in the desolate plains of Kansas. No questions asked, no manifests, no tracking, just a pickup time, a drop-off location, and a hefty sum wired directly to his account upon completion. The lack of details, the secrecy, the sheer anonymity of the client, all of it screamed danger. Every fiber of Jack's seasoned trucker intuition screamed to hit delete, to walk away, to forget he ever saw the email. But the image of his mounting bills, the fear of losing his rig, the gnawing anxiety of financial ruin, they were louder than any warning bells. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Jack, you old fool. Didn't your mama ever tell you not to open strange emails, especially ones promising untold riches for shady dealings? And you'd be right. It's the kind of scenario that makes for great campfire stories, or perhaps the opening scene of a horror movie. But let's be honest, how many of us, when faced with a truly desperate situation, haven't considered bending our own rules just a little? How many of us haven't been tempted by the allure of a quick fix, even if it comes wrapped in a shroud of mystery? It's a human weakness, a vulnerability that the truly sinister often exploit. And in Jack's case, that vulnerability was about to be exploited in the most terrifying way imaginable. He accepted the offer. The coordinates arrived, a string of numbers leading him to a forgotten corner of the Nevada desert, miles from any paved road, under a sky so vast and dark it felt like the edge of the world. The pickup time was set for the dead of night, a detail that only amplified the growing unease in Jack's gut. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself it was just a high-security shipment, something sensitive that required absolute discretion. But the rationalizations felt hollow, like whispers in a vast, empty canyon. As Jack drove towards the coordinates, the landscape grew increasingly desolate. The last vestiges of civilization faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by an endless expanse of scrub brush, jagged rocks, and the skeletal silhouettes of ancient cacti. The air grew heavy, still, and the silence was profound, broken only by the rumble of his engine and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath his tires. The moon, a sliver of bone in the inky blackness, cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed in his peripheral vision, playing tricks on his tired eyes. He arrived at the designated spot precisely at midnight. There was no sign of life, no lights, no other vehicles. Just a single, isolated concrete slab, barely visible in the faint moonlight, and resting upon it, a container. It was a standard shipping container, the kind you see by the thousands at ports and rail yards, but this one felt different. It was painted a dull, matte black, absorbing the scant light, making it seem like a void, a black hole in the desert night. There were no markings, no company logos, no hazard warnings. It was utterly anonymous, and that anonymity was more terrifying than any skull and crossbones. As Jack backed his rig up to the container, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, gaunt, and cloaked in a dark, nondescript trench coat, the client was a silhouette against the faint starlight. His face was obscured by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat, and his voice, when he spoke, was a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. He spoke only a few words, confirming the destination and reiterating the strict instructions. Do not open, do not inspect, deliver as is. There was no handshake, no pleasantries, just a cold, unsettling finality to his tone. He watched, unmoving, as Jack expertly hitched the container to his trailer, the metallic clang echoing eerily in the vast silence of the desert. With the container secured, the shadowy figure melted back into the darkness from which he came, leaving Jack alone once more, the weight of the mysterious cargo now physically and psychologically pressing down on him. He pulled away from the concrete slab, the tires kicking up dust that swirled like ghostly apparitions in his headlights. The journey had begun, and with it, a creeping sense of dread that settled deep in his bones. He tried to shake it off, to focus on the road, on the promise of financial freedom. But the silence in his cab, once a comfort, now felt oppressive, pregnant with unspoken secrets. Hours passed. The desert gave way to rolling hills, then to the endless, flat expanse of the Great Plains. The sun began its slow ascent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, serene tableau that felt utterly at odds with the growing unease in Jack's mind. He was tired, but sleep felt like a distant luxury. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of the black container, a silent, brooding presence behind him. He told himself it was just a job, a strange one, but just a job nonetheless. He'd delivered weirder things, he reasoned, though none came to mind at that moment. Then it happened. A sound. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, a soft, rhythmic thump. Thump. Thump from the back of his trailer. Jack frowned, adjusting his mirrors. Was it the cargo shifting? A loose chain? He checked everything meticulously before leaving. He dismissed it, attributing it to the usual noises a truck makes on a long haul. The road was bumpy in places, after all. It was probably just the container settling. But the sound persisted, growing subtly louder, more distinct. It wasn't a mechanical thump. It was softer, more organic, like something hitting the inside of the container. Gently at first, then with a little more force. Thump, thump, thump. Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He turned down the radio, straining his ears, trying to isolate the sound. The rhythm was uneven, almost erratic. It wasn't a consistent vibration. It was deliberate. He told himself he was imagining things. The solitude, the lack of sleep, the inherent creepiness of the job. It was all playing tricks on his mind. He tried to focus on the road ahead, on the miles melting away beneath his wheels. But the sound was insistent, a persistent whisper in the back of his consciousness. He could feel it now, a faint vibration resonating through the floor of his cab, a subtle tremor that seemed to emanate directly from the black box behind him. Have you ever been in a situation where you hear something faint and unsettling, and you try to convince yourself it's nothing, that it's just your imagination, or the wind, or the creaks of an old house? But deep down, a tiny, insistent voice tells you otherwise? That's where Jack was. That tiny voice was screaming at him, telling him that this was no ordinary cargo, no ordinary sound. It was something else entirely, and that something else was starting to make itself known. The thump, thump, thump grew louder, more urgent. It was no longer a gentle settling. It was a distinct, muffled impact. And then he heard it, a faint, almost inaudible sound, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. A cry, a soft, desperate, muffled cry, coming from within the container. Jack's blood ran cold. He slammed on the brakes, the sudden deceleration throwing him forward against his seatbelt. The rig screeched to a halt on the deserted highway, The only sound now the ticking of the cooling engine and the frantic pounding of his own heart. He sat there, breath held, listening. The crying continued, a low, mournful sound, like a child in distress, trapped and terrified. It was faint, but it was there. He wasn't imagining it. He wasn't losing his mind. There was something alive in that container, something that was crying, and he was hauling it across the country. Jack slowly, deliberately, reached for his CB radio, his hand trembling. He needed to call someone, anyone. But then he hesitated. What would he say? I'm hauling a crying cargo? They'd think he was insane. And what about the money? The massive payout that was supposed to solve all his problems? He looked in his rearview mirror again, at the ominous black container, now perfectly still, perfectly silent. The crying had stopped, but the silence was even more terrifying than the sound. He knew with a chilling certainty that whatever was in there, it was listening, it was waiting, and he was alone, miles from anywhere, with a secret that was just beginning to reveal its true, horrifying nature. What was truly inside that black box, and what would happen when it finally broke free? The answers, my friends, lie further down this dark and winding road. Welcome back, intrepid explorers of the macabre. In our last segment, we left Jack, our weary trucker, stranded on a desolate highway, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The silence that followed the mysterious cries from his cargo was not a reprieve, but a chilling prelude, a void pregnant with unspoken terror. This is the moment where the ordinary man confronts the extraordinary, where the rational mind grapples with the undeniably irrational. It's a moment of profound vulnerability, a test of sanity, and a stark reminder that some journeys lead not just across physical landscapes, but into the darkest recesses of the human psyche. Jack sat there, frozen, the engine ticking softly, the vast emptiness of the plains stretching out around him. The silence from the container was absolute, a stark contrast to the frantic cries that had just assaulted his ears. Had he imagined it? Was the exhaustion finally getting to him? The logical part of his brain, the part that had navigated countless storms and mechanical failures, desperately sought a rational explanation. But the primal fear, the cold dread that had seeped into his bones, told a different story. He knew what he had heard, and he knew with a terrifying certainty that his cargo was not inanimate. Slowly, cautiously, Jack released his breath. He turned off the engine, plunging the cab into an even deeper silence. He needed to investigate. He had to know. Every instinct screamed at him to drive away, to abandon the truck and its sinister contents, to run as far and as fast as his legs could carry him. But the trucker's code, the ingrained sense of responsibility for his load, held him captive. And beneath that, the gnawing curiosity, the desperate need to understand what unspeakable horror he was transporting. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a stark path through the pre-dawn gloom. Stepping out of the cab, the cool night air bit at his skin, raising goosebumps. The vastness of the landscape felt suddenly menacing, the distant stars like cold, indifferent eyes watching his every move. He walked to the back of the trailer, his boots crunching on the gravel, each step echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The black container loomed before him, a monolithic tomb, its surface reflecting no light, only absorbing it, a silent, hungry maw. He ran his hand along the cold, unyielding steel. No seams, no obvious latches, no signs of forced entry or damage. It was perfectly sealed, a seamless, impenetrable box. He pressed his ear against the metal, holding his breath, listening intently. Nothing, not a sound. It was as if the cries had never happened, as if his mind had conjured them from the depths of his own fatigue and fear. But he knew better. The memory of that desperate, muffled wail was burned into his consciousness. He circled the container, his flashlight beam dancing over its surface, searching for any anomaly, any clue. He checked the hitch, the locks, the tires. Everything was secure exactly as it should be. It was baffling, infuriating, and terrifying. How could something be crying from inside a sealed metal box? Was it a trick? A prank? But the fear in his gut was too real, too visceral, to be dismissed as a joke. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, Jack, just call the cops. Or better yet, call the client and tell them to come get their creepy crying box. And you'd be absolutely right in a normal world. But this wasn't a normal world anymore. This was the twilight zone of the open road, where the rules bend and the logical often takes a permanent vacation. Besides, what would he say? Officer, I'd like to report a crying container. Yes, a container. No, I haven't been drinking. He'd be laughed off the phone, or worse, committed. And the client? The shadowy figure who vanished into thin air? Jack had a feeling that calling him would only invite more trouble, a kind of trouble that no police force could handle. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't explain, the ones that defy all reason. And those are the ones that truly get under your skin. As the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky, Jack climbed back into his cab, defeated but no less terrified. He started the engine, the familiar roar a welcome sound, a small anchor in the sea of his growing unease. He drove on, the black container a constant, ominous presence in his mirrors. He tried to focus on the road, on the rising sun, on anything but the chilling mystery behind him. But the silence from the cargo was now more unsettling than any sound. It was a watchful silence, a patient silence, a silence that felt like it was waiting. Hours later, as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows from the truck, the sounds began again. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, like a whisper carried on the wind. But this time it wasn't a cry. It was a voice, a low, guttural murmur, just beyond the edge of audibility. Jack strained his ears, turning down the radio, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Was it his imagination? The hum of the tires? The wind whistling past the cab? No, it was distinct. A voice. And it was coming from the container. It was speaking, but the words were a jumble, a cacophony of distorted sounds, like a radio tuned between stations. He couldn't make out any specific words, but the tone. The tone was chilling. It was a voice filled with ancient malice, with a hunger that transcended human understanding. It was a voice that spoke of unspeakable things, of horrors that lurked in the forgotten corners of the world. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They began to weave themselves into the fabric of his thoughts, insidious and pervasive. He started to hear his name, whispered from the depths of the container, distorted and mocking. Jack! Jack! It was a sound that crawled under his skin, raising the hairs on the back of his neck. He tried to block it out, to focus on the road, but the whispers were relentless, a constant assault on his sanity. He found himself talking to himself, muttering denials, trying to convince himself that it wasn't real. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something materialize in the reflection. The lines between reality and hallucination began to blur. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. Every shadow seemed to move. Every distant sound seemed to carry a hidden message. He was descending into a spiral of paranoia, his mind unraveling thread by thread. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? To be trapped in a nightmare, and to know that no one will believe you, to be surrounded by people, yet feel utterly alone in your torment. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the nature of sanity? How fragile it truly is, how easily it can be chipped away by relentless psychological pressure. What would you do if the world around you seemed normal, but your own reality was being twisted into something unrecognizable? Would you fight it, or would you succumb to the whispers, to the shadows, to the creeping madness that threatens to consume you? As Jack continued his journey, the whispers from the container grew clearer, more coherent. They were no longer just distorted sounds. They were words, words that spoke of ancient rituals, of forgotten gods, of a hunger that had existed since the dawn of time. They spoke of the souls it had consumed, the lives it had ruined, the despair it had fed upon. And then, the most chilling revelation of all, the whispers began to speak of him. They knew his name, his fears, his deepest regrets. They taunted him with his financial struggles, with his loneliness, with his choices he had made that had led him to this terrifying predicament. He saw fleeting shadows in his peripheral vision, darting across the road, disappearing just as quickly as they appeared. He felt a cold, unseen presence in his cab, a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The truck's electronics began to malfunction, the radio crackling with static, the dashboard lights flickering in sync with the whispers from the cargo. It was as if the entity was feeding on the truck's very essence, drawing power from its systems, making its presence known in increasingly unsettling ways. He tried to ignore it, to push through, to reach his destination. But the psychological assault was relentless. He started to see things in the darkness outside his windows, grotesque, fleeting shapes that seemed to mimic the shadows of trees and rocks, but were undeniably something else. His reflection in the rearview mirror seemed distorted, his eyes wide with a terror that was no longer just fear, but a creeping madness. Then the whispers coalesced. They formed a single, clear voice, a child's voice, soft and pleading, yet imbued with an unsettling, ancient resonance. "Help me," it whispered, the sound seeming to come from directly behind his seat, not from the container. "Please help me. I'm trapped. My name is Lily." The voice was so real, so heartbreakingly innocent, that it pierced through Jack's terror, momentarily overriding his paranoia. He slammed on the brakes again, his heart leaping into his throat. Lily, a child, trapped. He had to help her. He had to. But as he looked in his rearview mirror, the black container seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent light, and the child's voice, now tinged with a chilling, predatory glee, whispered, "You're next, Jack. You're next." He was faced with an impossible choice. Break his contract and open the container, risking everything, or continue on his journey, knowing that an innocent life, or something far more sinister, was suffering just feet behind him. The road ahead was dark, but the darkness within that container was far more terrifying. What would Jack choose? And what unspeakable horror awaited him if he dared to open the box? The answers lie in the chilling depths of Act 3. We stand now at the precipice, at the very edge of a decision that will forever alter the course of our narrative. Jack, our embattled protagonist, is caught in a maelstrom of fear, desperation, and a chilling plea that tugs at the very core of his humanity. The voice, the child's voice, whispering from the depths of that ominous container, has presented him with an impossible dilemma. To honor his contract, to secure his financial future, means to condemn what he believes to be an innocent soul to an unknown, terrifying fate. To break it, to open the box, means to confront a horror that has already begun to unravel his sanity. This is the moment of truth, the crucible where character is forged, and where the line between courage and madness blurs into an indistinguishable haze. In the grand tapestry of human experience, there are moments that define us, choices that echo through the corridors of our lives, shaping our destiny. For Jack, this was one such moment. The promise of wealth, the lure of stability, all paled in comparison to the desperate plea of a trapped child. Or was it a child? The chilling, predatory glee in the voice's final whisper, "You're next, Jack," resonated with a malevolence that defied the innocence it mimicked. Yet, the image of a helpless victim, suffering in the darkness, was a powerful motivator, a call to action that resonated with the inherent goodness that still flickered within his weary soul. He had to open it. The decision, once made, brought with it a strange sense of calm, a clarity born from absolute desperation. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce determination. He would not be a party to whatever unspeakable act was unfolding behind him. He would not abandon a child to such a fate. He would face whatever horror awaited him head-on. Jack drove for another hour, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape for a suitable spot. He needed isolation, a place where no one would see, no one would hear. He found it, finally, a forgotten dirt track leading off the main highway, winding deep into a thicket of gnarled, ancient trees. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like specters in the fading light. The air grew heavy, still, pregnant with an unspoken tension. This was it, the point of no return. He parked the rig, the engine's final sigh echoing in the oppressive silence. He grabbed his tools, his hands surprisingly steady despite the frantic pounding of his heart. The container loomed in the twilight, a black monolith against the darkening sky, its silence now a deafening roar. He approached it, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating the heavy-duty locks that secured the double doors. These weren't ordinary locks. They were industrial-grade, designed to withstand immense force. A shiver ran down his spine. What kind of cargo required such security? He worked quickly, efficiently, his years of experience as a trucker guiding his hands. The first lock clicked open, then the second. The heavy chains clattered to the ground, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. He stood before the doors, his hand hovering over the cold steel, a moment of profound hesitation. What if it wasn't a child? What if it was something far worse? What if opening these doors unleashed a terror he couldn't possibly comprehend? Have you ever stood on the threshold of a decision, knowing that whatever lies beyond that door, that choice will irrevocably change your life? That moment of suspended animation, where the past is a fading echo and the future is an unwritten, terrifying blank page? That's where Jack was. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn back, to leave the box sealed, to drive away and pretend this never happened. But the image of Lily, the child's voice, her desperate plea, held him captive. And so, with a deep breath that tasted of fear and resolve, he pulled the doors open. The interior of the container was plunged into absolute darkness, a void that seemed to swallow the beam of his flashlight. A wave of stale, metallic air washed over him, carrying with it a faint, sickly sweet odor, like decaying flowers and something else, something indescribably foul. He stepped inside, his boots scraping against the rough metal floor, the sound amplified in the oppressive silence. He swept the flashlight beam around, his heart hammering against his ribs, expecting to see a small, huddled figure, a child cowering in the corner. But there was no child, no Lily. The container was empty, utterly, terrifyingly empty. Jack's mind reeled. Had it all been a hallucination? Had the stress, the lack of sleep, finally broken him? He stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat, a wave of dizzying confusion washing over him. He was about to step out, to close the doors and dismiss the entire ordeal as a waking nightmare, when the flashlight beam caught something in the far corner. It was a shadow, not a physical shadow cast by an object, but a deeper, darker patch of nothingness, a distortion in the very fabric of the air. It pulsed, faintly, with a malevolent energy, like a bruise on reality. And from within that shadow, a sound began to emanate. Not a cry, not a whisper, but a low, guttural growl. A sound that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the container, shaking Jack to his core. The shadow began to expand, to coalesce, drawing in the scant light, becoming denser, more defined. It stretched, elongated, taking on a vaguely humanoid form, but twisted, distorted, impossibly tall and gaunt. Its limbs were too long, its head too small, and where its eyes should have been, there were only twin points of burning, malevolent red light. It was not a child. It was not human. It was a nightmare given form, a creature of pure, unadulterated terror. And then it spoke, not with Lily's voice, but with a chorus of voices, a cacophony of screams, whispers, and guttural roars, all emanating from that single, horrifying entity. It was the sound of 1,000 tormented souls, a symphony of despair, a testament to the countless victims it had consumed. "You opened the door," the voices hissed, a chilling, sibilant whisper that echoed in the confines of the container, wrapping around Jack like a shroud. This was the truth of the cargo. Not a child, but an ancient entity, a parasitic horror that fed on fear, despair, and the very essence of human suffering. The cries, the whispers, the illusion of Lily. It had all been a lure, a carefully crafted trap to ensnare its next victim. And Jack, in his desperate attempt to do good, had walked right into its maw. The entity was a manifestation of all the pain and suffering that had ever occurred on the lonely highways of America, a sentient embodiment of forgotten tragedies, of lost souls, of the dark underbelly of the open road. The creature lunged, its impossibly long limbs extending, its shadowy form blurring into a terrifying streak of darkness. Jack reacted on instinct, scrambling backward, fumbling for the door. The air crackled with malevolent energy, the stench of decay growing stronger, suffocating him. He burst out of the container, gasping for breath, his lungs burning. He slammed the doors shut, the heavy steel echoing with the creature's enraged roar. He fumbled with the locks, his fingers clumsy with terror, desperate to seal the nightmare back inside. But it was too late. As he struggled with the chains, a dark, amorphous tendril snaked out from beneath the container doors, wrapping around his ankle. It was cold, impossibly strong, and it began to pull. Jack screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror, as he was dragged back towards the black maw of the container. He kicked, he clawed, he fought with every ounce of strength he had, but the tendril held fast, its grip tightening, dragging him closer and closer to the abyss. He managed to grab onto the side of his truck, his fingers digging into the cold metal, desperate for purchase. The tendril pulled harder, stretching his arm, threatening to dislocate his shoulder. He could feel the cold, slimy surface of the creature against his skin, its foul breath washing over him. He was inches from the opening, the darkness within beckoning, promising an eternity of torment. Talk about a bad day at the office, right? 1 minute you're just trying to make an honest living. The next you're playing tug of war with an ancient, soul-devouring entity in the middle of nowhere. It's enough to make you reconsider your career choices, isn't it? Perhaps a nice, quiet desk job, far away from anything that cries in the dark. But for Jack, there was no turning back. The game had changed. He was no longer the transporter. He was the prey. and the chase had just begun. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Jack managed to wrench his ankle free, tearing his skin on the rough metal. He scrambled into the cab, slamming the door shut, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely insert them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a sound that had never been so welcome. He slammed the truck into gear, tires spitting gravel, and sped away from the nightmare, leaving the black container, now ominously silent, behind him. But the entity was not so easily escaped. As Jack sped down the dirt track, he saw it in his rearview mirror, a shadowy form, impossibly fast, gliding effortlessly through the trees, keeping pace with his accelerating rig. It was hunting him. The roles were reversed. Jack was no longer the one in control. He was the hunted, a terrified mouse fleeing a relentless predator. He swerved onto the main highway, pushing the truck to its limits, the speedometer needle climbing higher and higher. The creature, however, seemed to defy the laws of physics, appearing and disappearing in his mirrors, sometimes a fleeting shadow in the darkness, sometimes a towering, grotesque figure looming just behind his trailer. It was playing with him, toying with its prey, savoring the fear that radiated from Jack in waves. Jack knew he couldn't outrun it forever. He was exhausted, terrified, and his truck, as powerful as it was no match for a supernatural entity. He needed help. He needed answers. He needed someone who understood what he was facing. And then, a name flashed in his mind, a name whispered in hushed tones among the old-timers at the truck stops. A legend of a man who had seen things, who had survived things that no one else could explain. Old Man Silas, a retired trucker, a recluse, living off the grid somewhere in the desolate badlands of Arizona. They said he was crazy, that he talked to shadows, but they also said he knew things. Things about the dark corners of the road, about the things that lurked in the forgotten places. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jack changed course, veering off towards the southwest. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was his only hope. He drove through the night, the entity a constant, terrifying presence in his mirrors, sometimes close enough to see its burning red eyes, sometimes a distant, mocking shadow. He pushed himself to the brink of collapse, fueled only by fear and the desperate hope that Silas could provide the answers, the salvation he so desperately needed. He found Silas's ramshackle cabin just as the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the desert sky in hues of orange and purple. The cabin was a collection of rusted metal and weathered wood, looking like it had been cobbled together from forgotten dreams and discarded nightmares. As Jack pulled up, the shadowy entity shimmered in his rearview mirror, then vanished, as if the light of dawn, or perhaps the presence of Silas, had driven it back into the abyss. Silas was a gaunt, ancient man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a startling, piercing blue that seemed to see right through Jack. He listened patiently, silently, as Jack, breathless and trembling, recounted his terrifying ordeal. There was no disbelief in Silas's eyes, only a profound, weary understanding. When Jack finished, Silas nodded slowly, a grim expression on his face. "The hunger?" Silas rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across asphalt. "It's been around since the first road was paved, since the first traveler dared to venture into the unknown. It feeds on fear, on despair, on the lost souls of the highway. It's a parasite, a shadow that clings to the lonely places, waiting for its next meal." Jack's heart sank. "Can it be killed?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Silas shook his head. "No, not killed, only contained." He walked over to a dusty bookshelf, pulling down a thick, leather-bound tome. He flipped through its ancient pages, his finger tracing faded symbols and arcane diagrams. It thrives on freedom on the open road. It hates confinement. The container, it was its prison. And you, son, you let it out. Silas looked up, his piercing blue eyes meeting Jack's. There's only one way to stop it, to put it back where it belongs. But it's a one-way trip, son. A sacrifice. You lure it back into the container, and you seal it from the inside. You become the lock. You become the prison. The words hung in the air, heavy with dread. A chilling pronouncement of Jack's ultimate fate. He had opened the door to hell, and now the only way to close it was to step inside himself. What would Jack choose? Would he sacrifice himself to save others from the terrifying hunger? The answer, and the final desperate confrontation, awaits us in Act 4. We arrive now at the culmination of our terrifying journey, at the precipice of a choice that transcends mere survival and delves into the profound depths of sacrifice. Jack, our unwitting hero, stands before a truth so stark, so chilling, that it demands an answer not just from his courage, but from his very soul. The entity, the ancient hunger, cannot be destroyed, can only be contained. And the price of that containment is the ultimate surrender, a one-way trip into the abyss from which it emerged. This is the true measure of a hero, not in the battles won, but in the willingness to lay down one's own life for the greater good, to become the very lock that seals away the darkness. In the annals of human history, countless tales speak of such sacrifices, of individuals who, when faced with an insurmountable evil, chose to stand firm, to become the bulwark against the encroaching shadows. Their names may not always be etched in monuments, their deeds not always sung in anthems, but their impact reverberates through time, a silent testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Jack, a simple truck driver, was about to join their ranks, not by choice, but by the cruel hand of fate, and by his own unwavering sense of responsibility. Silas's words hung heavy in the desert air, a death knell and a call to arms all at once. You lure it back into the container and you seal it from the inside. You become the lock. You become the prison. Jack looked at the ancient man, his eyes reflecting a mixture of terror and a dawning grim resolve. He had unleashed this horror. It was his burden to contain it. The thought of leaving it free to prey on other unsuspecting souls was more terrifying than any personal sacrifice. How? Jack asked, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. How do I lure it back? Silas led him into a small, cluttered shed behind his cabin, a place filled with strange artifacts, dusty tomes, and the faint scent of herbs and something metallic. He pulled out a worn, leather-bound book, its pages brittle with age. The hunger feeds on fear, on despair, Silas explained, his voice low and gravelly. But it also craves the familiar. It was drawn to your truck, to the constant movement, the endless road. It sees the container as its home, its sanctuary. We must make it believe it's returning to its lair, to its feast. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and utterly insane. Jack would drive his rig, the empty container now a beacon of false promise, back onto the highway. He would become the bait, the lure. Silas, meanwhile, would prepare a series of ancient wards and sigils, drawn from the forgotten lore of the road, to weaken the entity, to make it vulnerable enough to be trapped. The timing had to be perfect, the execution flawless. One wrong move, and not only would Jack be lost, but the hunger would be unleashed upon the world with renewed fury. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Silas meticulously drew intricate symbols on the inside of the container with a strange, phosphorescent chalk, muttering incantations in a language Jack didn't understand. He instructed Jack on how to drive, how to project a sense of fear and desperation that would draw the entity in, but also a hidden strength that would allow him to resist its full power. Jack, for his part, cleaned his rig, checked every system, every light, every tire. This was to be his final ride, and he wanted his chariot to be ready. As dusk settled, painting the desert sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, Jack climbed into his cab. The silence was different now, not just empty, but charged with anticipation, with the weight of the coming confrontation. He looked at Silas, who stood by the roadside, a stoic sentinel against the encroaching darkness. "Good luck, son," Silas said, his voice barely audible above the idling engine. "May the road rise to meet you." Jack pulled onto the highway, the empty container rattling behind him, a hollow drumbeat accompanying his racing heart. He drove slowly at first, allowing the entity to sense his presence, to feel the fear radiating from him. He could feel it, a cold, unseen presence, coalescing in his mirrors, a shadowy form that seemed to grow larger with each passing mile. It was following him, drawn by the scent of his terror, by the promise of a final, delicious meal. He increased his speed, pushing the rig harder, the engine roaring in protest. The entity responded, its shadowy form elongating, stretching, keeping pace with him. It was a terrifying dance, a macabre ballet between predator and prey. He could hear the whispers now, not just in his mind, but echoing from the container, a chorus of mocking voices, taunting him, promising him an eternity of torment. "Come to us, Jack. Join us. You belong with us." He drove for hours, the chase intensifying, the entity growing bolder, sometimes appearing directly behind his trailer, its burning red eyes fixed on him. He felt its tendrils, unseen but palpable, reaching for him, trying to pull him back, to drag him into the darkness. He fought back, not with physical strength, but with sheer willpower, with the image of countless innocent lives he was trying to save. Imagine, for a moment, being pursued by an unseen force, a malevolent entity that feeds on your very essence. Every shadow seems to move, every sound is amplified, and the line between reality and nightmare blurs into an indistinguishable haze. What would you do? How long could you resist the creeping madness, the overwhelming terror? It's a test of endurance, a battle for your soul, and for Jack, the stakes couldn't be higher. He was not just fighting for his life, but for the very fabric of reality on the open road. As he approached the designated spot, a desolate, abandoned stretch of highway known for its eerie silence, Jack knew his time was running out. The entity was almost upon him, its whispers now a deafening roar in his mind, its shadowy form filling his rearview mirror. He could feel its cold breath on his neck, its hunger a palpable presence in the cab. He had to act now. He slammed on the brakes, the rig skidding to a halt, tires screaming in protest. The entity, caught off guard, recoiled for a moment, its shadowy form flickering. This was his chance. He threw open the cab door, grabbed the heavy-duty chain Silas had given him, and leaped out, running towards the back of the trailer. The entity, recovering from its momentary disorientation, surged forward, its form solidifying, becoming a towering, grotesque figure, its burning red eyes fixed on him. Jack reached the back of the container, his hands fumbling with the heavy doors. The entity was almost upon him, its shadowy tendrils reaching, grasping. He could hear the screams of its past victims, a chorus of agony that threatened to shatter his resolve. He pulled the doors open, revealing the dark, chalk-marked interior, a beacon of false promise for the hungry entity. He stepped inside, turning to face the monster, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The entity hesitated for a moment, sensing the trap, but the lure of the familiar, the promise of its prison-turned feast, was too strong. It surged forward, its shadowy form filling the opening, its burning eyes fixed on Jack. He stood his ground, a defiant figure against the encroaching darkness, his fear a palpable shield against its malevolence. As the entity entered the container, its form began to flicker, to waver, the ancient wards drawn by Silas beginning to take effect. With a guttural roar of rage and frustration, the entity lunged, its tendrils wrapping around Jack, pulling him into its cold embrace. He screamed, a raw, primal sound, as the darkness consumed him. But even as he was pulled into the abyss, his hands, guided by a desperate, final surge of strength, reached for the heavy chains. He wrapped them around the inside latches, pulling them tight, securing the doors from within. The metallic clang echoed through the container, a final, definitive sound, as the darkness swallowed him whole. The rig stood silent on the deserted highway, the black container a silent, ominous presence in the fading light. The sun, now a distant memory, left the world cloaked in a profound, unsettling darkness. The silence was absolute, broken only by the gentle whisper of the wind through the dry grass. Jack was gone. His sacrifice, a silent testament to the horrors that lurk in the unseen corners of our world. Days later, the abandoned truck was discovered by a passing motorist. The authorities were baffled. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just a perfectly sealed container, its contents a mystery. The official report was inconclusive, a series of unanswered questions and unsettling theories. The container, too heavy to move easily, was eventually transported to a secure, undisclosed government facility, a ticking time bomb waiting for its next victim, a silent monument to the man who dared to look into the abyss and sacrificed himself to seal it away. But the story of Jack, the truck driver who faced the hunger, did not die with him. It became a legend, whispered in hushed tones at lonely truck stops, a cautionary tale passed down from one generation of truckers to the next. His rig, found abandoned but intact, became a ghost story, its engine sometimes heard roaring down desolate highways in the dead of night, a phantom truck carrying a phantom cargo, forever searching for a hero to take its place. His sacrifice became a testament to the unsung heroes of the open road, the silent guardians who protect us from the things that lurk just beyond the veil of our understanding. Jack's story is a chilling reminder of the unseen horrors that can lurk in the shadows of our world, of the sacrifices made to keep them at bay. But what about the horrors that are all too real, the ones that we can see with our own eyes, the ones that leave an indelible mark on our history? The ones that remind us of humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction. In our next video, we explore the terrifying aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster, the silent ghosts of a city abandoned, and what the first responders saw in the moments after the explosion. It's a story of courage, of devastation, and of the lingering echoes of a catastrophe that changed the world forever. Click the video on your screen now to continue your journey into the heart of darkness and uncover the chilling truths that lie beneath the surface of our reality. Don't miss it. You won't be able to sleep after this one. Or perhaps you'll sleep more soundly, knowing what lurks just beyond the light.